With Omega now fully recovered from her injuries, she was happy with the prospect of reuniting with the Martez sisters, but the rest of the squad were more concerned with infiltrating the most protected planet in the galaxy for a second time. The introduction of the Imperial Defense Recruitment Bill had made clones like themselves an even greater target, and for the journey to Coruscant, the clones were disguised in civilian clothing and were on board a Class 4 container vessel. The nervous journey was not helped by the patrolling TK troopers, and when they eventually landed on Coruscant, Hunter helps them avoid the border guards by escaping through the streets. The clones have to evade the replacement of the Coruscant Guard, and they take a large airspeeder to level 1313 of the underworld of Coruscant. The clones begin a descent through one of the underworld's portals, unaware that they were being watched from a balcony of one of the buildings as they entered the repair shop of Trace Martez. Trace's older sister Rafa was less than impressed with the mission assigned by Rex, but as they had helped obtain a data rod on Corellia, she considered this as returning the favour. The Martez sisters had made further modifications since their previous mission, but as they were beginning their ascent, they started to take hits from TK troopers until they rose above the underworld. Once they were out of the portal, the rear deflector shields were smouldering, and Trace redirected the energy to the front shields, as they now faced anti-aircraft turbo laser turrets. Even with the fully functioning shields, the Nebula-class freighter begins to lose altitude, and Trace resorts to one of her modifications, which was a prototype cloaking device. The Imperial forces were shocked that such a small ship could have such a device, and though the Empire had tracking torpedoes on their larger ships, the density of buildings took this weapon out of their armory. As the role of tracking the Silver Angel was delegated to the ground troopers, Trace had obviously miscalculated the concentration of Stygium crystals, and the cloaking device simmered out of action as they crashed into the centre of the roof of the Senate Apartment complex. Sparks flew into the air as the hull of the Silver Angel skidded along the ground, and the Silver Angel dangled off of the side of the platform until Wrecker helped to drag the ship back into safer territory. As the crew got to their feet, AZI-3 tended to any minor injuries, whilst Echo helped the Martez sisters repair the ship. Hunter's enhanced senses detected an electromagnetic anomaly and pointed to the building beside them, which had the face of former Naboo Senator Padme Amidala. Though the entrance was sealed, Omega's curiosity convinced Hunter to investigate, and he found a weakness in the walls to create a small tunnel. Once they were inside the apartment, they found everything covered in ornate cloth, but what drew Hunter's attention was a small scout transmitter which had been left behind. With nothing else of note in the apartment, Hunter gives the transmitter to Echo, but even he can't identify its source, so he suggests someone on Coruscant who might. With Imperial patrols in the distance, Hunter and Omega carefully prowl the streets and travel from the high-end Senate district to the hard-nosed industrial district known as Cocoa Town. The two clones entered into a shady-looking diner, and approaching the counter, they were greeted by an amicable basilisk known as Dexter. The formation of the new empire had not been kind to Dexter or his diner, but when Hunter used Echo's advice and said they had known a man named Obi-Wan Kenobi, Dexter was willing to identify their scout transmitter. As Echo had suspected, the transmitter was of Naboo descent, but as they were about to leave, Echo reported from the other side of the city that the Empire was homing in. Somebody had obviously not taken a liking to the desecration of Amidala's home, and at Dex's diner, the trio were now surrounded by patrol gunships. Dexter had been in worse situations, however, and guiding the clones out of the rear entrance, he made sure to redirect one of the nearby steam pipes, conveniently in the faces of the TK troopers. As the clones were misdirected by Dexter, Omega and Hunter were in an old factory, but with the signal obscured by the buildings, they had no easy route to the Silver Angel. As they tried to climb the roof, they started to feel colder, which was strange considering the heat generated by their surroundings, but then they saw Royal Guards. Their previous experiences and sightings on the HoloNet told the clones that a figure of authority was nearby, so they decided to climb upwards through scaffolding until they found the roof. With a sufficient signal, Hunter tries to contact Echo and the crew, but all he could hear from the other end was static. As Omega and Hunter looked to the skies, they did not see the Silver Angel, but a squadron of intimidating gunships, and Hunter started to look for options. The Royal Guards began their ascent, and as the TK troopers loaded their weapons, Hunter made his move. The clone jumped onto the closest TK trooper, and taking his DC-15A blaster, he threw the weapon back to Omega. This was not one of the plans she had learned from Tech, but improvisation was one of her specialities, and firing the ascension cable at the closest gunship, she narrowly escaped the pike of a royal guard, and now started to tilt the gunship. Omega clearly not received Hunter's instructions, as the clone was now captured by the TK troopers, but Hunter managed to use the angle of the ship to slide his DC-17 pistol to Omega. As she looked at Hunter, she realised the magnitude of his sacrifice, and she severed the connection to the ship. Omega fell onto a nearby roof, and she could hear the voice of Hunter fading as she entered the network of alleyways. Omega fired off shots with a DC-17 hand pistol as the TK troopers descended from the gunships, until she was dragged into an abandoned warehouse. When Omega awoke, she heard the voice of Asajj Ventress, whom thought Omega was about to reveal her location. Whilst Omega was unwilling to trust a Dathomirian, Ventress pointed out that she had little choice, so the clone explained why she had been on the run. Ventress was able to shed light on why the Emperor wanted Omega, but there was no time to test her force capabilities, as she now needed to move as soon as possible. The Night Sister wasn't willing to help Omega save the clones, but as her own mission was away from Coruscant, she helped her find a shuttle at the old shipyard, where she could travel to Naboo, which was her only lead at this moment. Using the lessons taught by Tech, Omega is able to get her shuttle off of the ground, and with Imperial forces searching elsewhere, she is able to leave and enter Imperial airspace. Thanks to the ship's autopilot, Omega merely had to input the coordinates, and she would arrive on Naboo after a number of days. Since the rise of the Empire, Naboo was a planet which had yet to complete its takeover, but Omega remained alert as she passed through the smattering of Imperial ships. The clone had no other clue than the name of the planet and the name Padme Amidala, so when she landed in Theed spaceport, she asked the local Naboo security forces where she could find Padme's allies. The guards and officers looked at each other with suspicion and confusion, but before they could assess the threat of Omega, they are interrupted by Sabe, who ordered Omega to hand over the scout transmitter. Sabe ensured the guards would not take Omega, and took her to a secret base of operations, where she had kept archives on Padme since her death on Polis Massa. When Omega told her of the captured clones, Sabe believes they can work together because she needed an Imperial droid to decrypt some of the recordings in Padme's apartment. Sabe and Omega take one of the abandoned starfighters from the Theed Palace hangar, and the former handmaiden sets coordinates for an Imperial orbital station. Once they're in Imperial airspace, they discover that the elaborate scaffolding is still on the exterior, and the hangar bays are yet to be constructed. Sabe decides to quietly land the starfighter on one of the lower levels, and they each set about their personal missions. The former handmaiden finds her mission much simpler, as she didn't need a droid but a data port, but what she saw was Padme's last words to Anakin Skywalker as he left for Mustafar. The anger within Sabe was soon replaced with panic, as Omega triggered the station's alarms by accessing the navigation computers. Running back to the ship, they fire the twin blaster cannons at the prototype TIE fighters, which were beginning to activate. As the station started to explode, Omega and Sabe knew they had drawn more attention than they had planned, but on their return to Naboo, Sabe makes contact with Bail Organa. The leader of the resistant movement was intrigued by Omega and the rogue clones, and he thought these captured clones could be useful, so he decided to provide Omega with transportation and Alderaanian forces to Wayland. Omega is able to formulate a rescue strategy, and they ultimately opt to land on the river beside Mount Tantis. When they approach the skies of Wayland, the V-Wing starfighters are heavily patrolling the area, but thanks to their stolen Imperial shuttle, they bypass the first wave of defences. But their deception does not last long, with Dr. Hemlock's patrols in the jungles after Omega's previous escape, and after spotting the uniforms of the Alderaanian pilots, Omega's crew was soon plummeting to the ground. Whilst they had landed close to their landing zone, they would have to seek alternative transport after their rescue, but even that was now in jeopardy. Omega decides that they split up, and as several Alderaanian officers created a distraction, Omega's small squad continued their journey through the river, now beneath the ground level of Tantis base. As they approached the sublevels, they heard a mixture of blaster fire and massive roars, and they cracked open one of the wall panels to find the Zelo beast, otherwise known as Specimen A. Through a small gap, Omega fires her energy crossbow at the tank's lever, and as the fluid started to be displaced, the Zelo beast was breaking free. The chaos created by this escape now alerted the entire facility, and Hemlock diverted more TK troopers to secure the beast, which was exactly what Omega and her crew had wanted. With the sub-level emptier, the two Alderaanian forces are able to approach the detention block, and after defeating the surprised TK troopers, the clones to Martez sisters and Nala Se were freed again. The Kaminoan left to deal with their research, but Tech was still missing, and the clones had heard he was in a more secure vault. Such a location would normally be impenetrable, but the Zelo beast was continuing its path of destruction, and the base was being torn apart. Instead of approaching the vault on foot, the clones now decided to retrieve the Silver Angel. Such was the new space created by the beast. But when they arrived, Omega felt the same coldness she had felt on Coruscant. Beside the Silver Angel was a Lambda-class shuttle, and out stepped the Emperor with his royal guards. As the Zelo beast thrashed about Tantis base, the Emperor was skeptical about Hemlock's claims that everything was under control, and he choked the overconfident Doctor before he could even make an excuse. The Emperor moved further into the remains of the facility to try and control the beast, and this left the clones free to take out the station TK troopers and retake the Silver Angel. With its relatively low height, it managed to avoid any remaining ceilings and smashed into the vault, where Tech was placed for Hemlock's cruel experiments. As the clones freed Tech, the Emperor arrived from his taming of the Zelo beast, and as the Silver Angel was about to leave the lab, he held the ship in the air with one of his hands. Hunter and Wrecker tried desperately to rotate the turret, but it was as if it had been locked into place, and it seemed all hope was lost. As Omega watched the desperate situation, she remembered the words of Ventress, and for the first time, she used the Force to nudge the Emperor. Though the effect was minimal, the surprise distracted Palpatine enough for the clones to escape, and they returned to Pabu. With the clones reunited and healed, they received a transmission from Bail Organa, who offered them a place in his growing resistance. One war had ended, but another was just beginning.